If you haven't joined me here before, you are now at the Live Ready Base Camp. So I've been setting up for a large group of people for a multi-day survival skills course, and I'm in a very remote part of South Africa. And the logistics of bugging out or dropping a group of people in the middle of the wilderness and having them actually survive, finding water sources, having the medical kits, having comms set up, being able to maintain core body temperatures at night. I slept here last night. Just thermoregulation in cold. It gets really cold out here. And there's a lot that goes into setting up a base camp for a group of people. And it applies to bugging out in a group as well. And whether you are preparing on behalf of your family or whether you're in a leadership position where you have been tasked with setting up base camps for larger groups of people, I'm going to share a lot of the logistical considerations in this video with you, so stay tuned. I'm Clarice. Welcome to the Live Ready channel. For a start, just finding a location where you can bug out with a group of people is a task in and by itself already. A bug out location, by definition, is a location where you are basically concealed from every other person, where you are completely remote and where there are no other people around. By connotation, that means that there's not a lot of resources around either. So it becomes really difficult actually keeping people alive, never mind comfortable, in a bug out situation. Now, I'm on a beautiful 8,000 hectare farm, and special thanks to Buffels River Camping for hosting me once again. It is always a pleasure being here, and they have the most amazing place to host survival skills courses. So the first thing that I found in setting up a base camp for a group of people is to firstly shelter these people, because we've got incoming weather. There was some rain last night, there's some wind. So finding a bug out location or a campsite that is perfect for the group of people that you are trying to conceal or maintain or keep alive in that place can be very tricky depending on what the needs are. So I had this thought this morning. I sat here thinking to myself, there's always the 5 W's of campsite selection. You want wood, water, wrigglers, and blah, 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 all the usual campsite considerations. But when you start looking at a bug out situation, you might actually need to remain concealed. Then camouflage and concealment becomes more important than finding a place that's not in a dip so that you don't have cold air. The dip might be perfect for camouflage and concealment, but now you're going to deal with temperatures. So there's a ridge up here. It's probably about 2 meters high. So I'm in an old riverbed that is not likely to flood at the moment, but I have concealed the camp. So depending on the group that you need and depending on the weather conditions, this actually might be a better position than up on the ridge. There's a much bigger riverbed not too far away from here, probably about 100 meters away. So this is like the flood bed for the river. So it's not ideal from a campsite selection perspective, because usually you wouldn't pick a campsite that's in a riverbed in case it floods, but for concealment purposes it's perfect. So as long as you know that the weather is not going to turn, then you can choose a campsite depending on what your needs are. Even though we did have a little bit of water coming down the riverbed this morning, which was nice to see, and it's amazing how quickly that happens. So last night the riverbed was completely dry, drizzled here a little bit. This morning the river is flowing, and it's literally because 120 kilometers upriver a couple of weeks ago it was raining and raining and raining for quite a while, and it's taken, I think it was something like 2 weeks or something like that, for the water to come all the way from there, and it came through this morning. So there is a danger in camping in riverbeds. There is a danger in camping in places that you can have mudslides or rock falls or things like that. But you're going to have to make decisions about those campsites depending on what you foresee the circumstances are going to be. What do you need concealment more? It's going to really depend on the circumstances that you find yourself in. I can go up onto the ridge, but then the group of people that I'm setting up to bug out is actually going to be exposed to elements a lot more. I found that when it was raining here yesterday, I was almost completely sheltered because of the trees that are just around. So depending on the needs of the situation, you're going to decide on the campsite location, never mind all the other logistical things. The more remote you go, the less communication there is available. So I have multiple radios here. I've got multiple radios in my car. And then you must also know that the frequencies that you talk on and that you communicate on with the group is going to also be listened to by other people. Just a little earlier, one of these radios piped up and it was someone else in the area who was talking on the same frequency. It is the emergency frequency, but you must also realize that there are other people scanning channels. So for communication purposes, how are you going to communicate with your group, with your bug out group, in such a way that other people are not going to be able to locate your base camp, because you want to be able to protect your resources and also protect your camp depending on the circumstances. Again, maybe it is a situation of unrest, or there is a situation where you are under a threat for some reason and you want to keep your camp concealed and also your resources. Then communicating with people becomes difficult, because whoever you communicate with on the radio is also going to be at risk of being found out by whoever is listening into your conversations. So I've had to get a whole bunch of radios here because there isn't cell phone reception where I am here. And even right down here, because I'm in a slight dip here, I don't pick up radio signals so well. I can hear a little bit of a squibble here and there. And if I walk up onto the ridge, then only do I actually get clear comms. So interesting to like go through this whole process of setting up a camp and being prepared for absolutely anything that can go wrong. On that note of things going wrong, you also need to be able to cater for the medical needs, and it's so difficult to foresee all of the medical needs, all of the possible emergencies that could actually occur in a situation where you've got a group of people in a remote place. And that's anything from an anaphylactic shock situation to a serious wound. I mean, there are axes and knives and all kinds of sharp sticks and snakes and things around here. There are jackals and things around at night. There are predators around. So you do run quite a bit of risk putting a group of people in this is not really even a very sheltered position. It's really actually very minorly sheltered. I mean, even there's just like a breeze that's just blowing right through here. So the animals can also just walk right through here. So it's not even a very sheltered place. So you need to have the right medical kit on hand to be able to treat something like an arterial bleed. You need to also have the skills and the knowledge on how to manage those kinds of situations. When do you use an EpiPen? When do you give epinephrine? When do you use a tourniquet? When don't you use a tourniquet? What kind of dressings do you put on burn wounds? Because we've got an open fire going here, and especially if there are kids around, then you must be able to treat wounds. And there was some really horrible stories that have come out of the bush from people having injured themselves with knives and things like that too. So you need to consider all of those things when you're packing a medical kit, and you also need to be able to improvise. So if, let's say I've got a whole lot of wound packing dressings at the bottom of this medical kit, and it's quite a staunch medical kit. But if you run out of wound packing stuff, you know what comes next. If you have only one windlass tourniquet, what else can you use in order to create a tourniquet? So there's a whole lot of skills and knowledge that also becomes a part of your medical contingency plan. Now, as survivalists, we know that further to medical needs, you also have core body temperature regulation, which is incredibly important for survival. So being able to make a fire, to conceal a fire, especially in something like a compromising drill, for example, where you suddenly have to put out a fire or conceal a fire, but you still need to keep people warm. So if you're in a non-permissive environment, for example, you're trekking out because you're moving between camps, maybe you're at a temporary base camp or you're at an observation point or something like that, then moving between points means you're also going to need to stay warm between points. But you might not always be moving in a permissive environment. You might not always be able to make an open fire. And even though this fire is concealed from above, and I've got a lot of trees out in the area, if I make a fire and I put just the right or just the wrong log on there and it smokes a whole lot, then I am going to reveal my location to the surrounding areas or to surrounding people or to casual observation or anybody who moves through the area or even aerial observation. There are drones that have thermal vision that are used to locate people, and that would absolutely see the heat from the fire through the top. So if you haven't watched it yet, go and check out the video I made about thermal camouflage. I'll link it over here, and you'll see how much a tarp like this that's got a silver lining actually insulates your heat, but also the moment it heats up, it will actually show a thermal image or a thermal imprint. So there are things like that to consider. How do you keep your core body temperature stable at night if you can't make a fire? Because I was cold here last night, even with a fire going. It gets really cold. It is the middle of winter at the moment. Even Hunter was cold, and he didn't sleep very well, did you know? Because you were cold. And you're also on guard duty all night. So it gets cold, and you have to be able to regulate your own body temperature in those situations. Tracking between camps or observation points or listening points, or even between if you've got like temporary bases. So there's a video that I made about a bug out fallback system, which kind of explains the idea behind having a relay system or a fallback system of bug out locations. So you don't necessarily have to have just one bug out location. You can have this as a temporary base and another temporary base 6 or 12 or 15 kilometers away from here, however far you think you might need to move if one base is compromised. For that you need good maps of the area. So having a good topographic map of the area is imperative, because you need to know where the water sources are, especially these 1 to 50,000 topo maps. They show fountains, they show where old riverbeds are. So even if the riverbed is dry, that's going to give you a good idea of where to start looking for water. It also shows you what to avoid if you don't want to be found. If you're trying to remain concealed, you're really going to avoid water sources, because all the people will trek to water sources. So those things become really important if you want to move around without being found, and having a topo map for that purpose is absolutely crucial. You also need to have the skills, the map work skills, to be able to read a map accurately. I once asked someone who is part of the search and rescue teams in an area where I live and work, what was the greatest reason that they found they had to go on search and rescue missions to find people in the wilderness. And they said absolutely because people cannot read maps. They don't understand contour lines. They don't understand gradients denoted by the contour lines. They think it's 6 kilometers, so 6 kilometers is an easy walk because the map says this tracking route or this trail is 6 kilometers. Meanwhile, it's 6 kilometers uphill and downhill, uphill and downhill, and it takes them a whole lot longer to cover that terrain than they thought they were going to take. So the long and the short of it is to actually have all of the skills that goes along with all of the gear. Now, getting gear out into a remote location by itself it really is a challenge. My car was so full coming here, just bringing things like pots and jerrys for water and just things that you use to actually like keep people alive. To get food in an area like this, I mean, there's a lot around here. There were kudus running past here last night. When I was out looking for a campsite, there was a kudu in the bush here as well. Driving around here last night, just going through the riverbed, I saw a spring hare. So there's a lot. There's a lot of animal life here. But you need to know how to trap them. You need to know how to hunt them, because otherwise you're going to go hungry. And then if you are bugging out and you really are dependent on the food sources of the location, you need to know that those food sources are going to become depleted if you're constantly remaining in the same location. So you would need to move around a bit like a nomad in order to not hunt all the wildlife in an area. An area like this, especially where it's quite dry, doesn't have that much replenishment all the time. It takes a while for animals to get to size. So yeah, and then also just like managing temperatures. What is the temperature at the moment? Let's have a look. It's actually quite chilly out here. Why are we on Fahrenheit again? 14.7 degrees at the moment, and it is currently 2 p.m. So that's quite cold for 1400 hours. Something else to consider is having the tools that you need to actually clear a space to set up a base camp. I mean, just getting through these thorn trees, there's some hectic thorns out here. I actually was bleeding so much yesterday just because a thorn actually hit my nail bed. So having axes around, having like garden shears, saws, things to process firewood, because firewood in the wilderness doesn't come pre-chopped for you. It doesn't come pre-made into pretty bags of wood. So you need to have, like, either you must have a chainsaw and hope that nobody hears you, or you must have a handsaw, and then you have to go around doing quite a bit of manual labor to get branches and things to make long log fires so that you can stay warm at night. Because I tell you, without this fire last night, I would have been absolutely freezing. So definitely, like, having tools and equipment and stuff to be able to maintain camps, to be able to clear ground, to be able to hunt, to contain water. Just having a jerry can to contain water. You can see this is how dry it is out here, and it hasn't properly rained here for a very long time. Something else to consider is also safety and security. How do you get ammunition out into a place in the remote wilderness? How much ammunition can you get out here? If you are going on foot, can you carry that amount? Because it's heavy. It gets heavy very quickly. Do you need to carry? Does someone in your group need to carry? Are you able to replenish supplies? Are you able to hunt with a rifle, or do you have to use a bow? Is it better to then take a crossbow? What if you get into a self-defense situation? How can you defend yourself? What if it's a wild animal that you have to defend yourself against? So all of those things you need to actually factor into your planning, into setting up a bug out location. The other thing to think about is noise levels at camp. So Hunter, for example, there were a couple of jackals around. They have the eeriest cries, and he was on high alert all night, and at one point there were a bunch of kudus who ran past, and they also made a noise, and he was up here barking at them. So if you want to remain concealed, then your dogs actually also need to be quiet. Kids need to be kept quiet. Noise levels need to be kept down. If you're running things like generators or anything that's generating electricity to keep things charged, then you need to maintain noise levels below a certain threshold so that you're not revealing your location to anyone who you don't want to know your location. Romans 8:28 says, God causes all things to work together for the good of those who serve him, for those who are called according to his purpose. So if at any point you doubt whether the preparations that you've made are actually sufficient for the situation you might find yourself in, remember that he will help you where you fall short. It is not up to us to make it everything perfect. We're not supposed to have it all planned out. We're only supposed to do our part. And where we fall short, he will step in and make sure that everything comes together for the good of those who serve him, for those who are called according to his purpose. Well, if you found value here, remember to hit like and subscribe. Follow me on social media. There's a whole lot of the everyday Live Ready stuff that goes onto Instagram and TikTok and onto the Facebook page, so keep an eye out for those. And until the next time, live ready.